Thank you, everybody, for coming. It is genuinely good to see everyone networking. So, okay, so next up, we have Dave Cartwright, Head of Technology Operations and Risk, Chief Information Security Officer at Santander International. So, you've heard a lot from technology vendors, from ex-UK Special Forces directors, and various other things with a lot of complexity, but a lot of exciting things. And what we thought we'd do, and Dave, as our exclusive, agreed to do, is share what does that mean to him? What does that mean for a practicing CISO who's doing this? How do we move forward? How is he viewing the world in terms of how he incorporates and how he takes this moving forward? So to share his thoughts, I can ask Dave to come up on stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. A practicing CISO, I will keep practicing. So to Mark's point, I'm going to touch on a couple of things. One is what we think we're going to have to defend against in 2023. I use the word defend, not protect, in the context that footy teams understand the concept that defenders might occasionally let the strikers past them. And then we'll have a look at, to echo some of the previous points, why we don't just have to throw money at it. So who am I? So I chair the Channel Islands Information Security Forum, which is the collective of cyber specialists in the Channel Islands. I'm a fellow of the BCS. I also sit on their branch's finance committee. I hold a CISSP. Any CISSP holders in the room? Yay. Shout out. I also, ISC are about to announce some changes to their member publication, which I've been involved with, so there'll be an announcement about that. I'm a member of the Chartered Institute of Information Security, and also if you will see my name on theregister.com, those of you who read that steadfast online publication, you'll see me there a lot. Now, any Americans in the room? No? If there were, that's Jersey, all right? So I'm based in Jersey. Santander International is the offshore bit of Santander, so I look after Channel Islands, Isle of Man, although we are a non-ring-fenced entity headquartered in London in those two principalities. So Arno talked about increased regulatory compliance. Well, we report to 4 financial regulators, 3 information commissioners, and there is a Jersey consultation out for a new cyber law as well, which will bring in more reporting. So we like regulation. In terms of why it's brilliant to live in Jersey, it's a fantastic place to live. And my commute is from there to there. I can walk it in 15 minutes. It's actually quicker than driving. It's a fantastic place, but it has its own regulators, as does the Isle of Man. It's a fun space to be in. So we'll start with what am I expecting to see in 2023. So I have a favourite threat analyst. His name's Kev. He's actually the head of threat intelligence for Santander UK. And those are his favourite 5. Kelsopre's ransomware is going to be the most prevalent thing we see, as is number 2, supply chain third-party risk. Anyone who thinks supply chain third-party risk is a new thing, my first experience of supply chain attack was 2002. It's not new, we've only just noticed it. Insider threat, interestingly, as it says at the bottom here, in Jersey, in the Channel Islands of the Isle of Man particularly, we don't see a great deal of insider threat. We're quite a microcosm, everyone knows everyone. And quite frankly, if you're a naughty boy or girl in Jersey, you tend not to be in Jersey for very long because you become instantly unemployable. It's an interesting dynamic. Insider threat, data breach, of course, accidental or deliberate, and wiper and other destructive malware. As well as ransomware, we're seeing more and more and more and more. We're just going to blow it away. We're not going to ask you for a ransom. We're just going to inconvenience you. That will all continue pretty much through 2023. What else is going to be big? Cyber insurance, and I've said there, for all the wrong reasons. Premiums are doing that. Exceptions to your policy are doing that. Level of coverage is doing that. About 6-7 years ago, a really lovely guy called Tim Rattray, who was CEO of one of the big insurance brokers in the Channel Islands, said cyber insurance isn't going to last because the premiums are way too low. At some point, they're going to realise they're paying out too much. That has now happened. New types of tech will hit the market. I've mentioned car technology there. I've just ordered a high-tech car. It's not really hit us yet because we haven't all got high-tech cars. I've got a 2011 Land Rover. That will change over time, and it's starting already. I mentioned that Jersey has a new cyber legislation consultation. You guys aren't particularly concerned about that. However, it wouldn't surprise me if it starts to appear in the UK. One of the key principles, for instance, is a bit like data protection. Cyber attacks are going to become reportable if this legislation goes the way they want it to. AI tools, ChatGPT has been mentioned already. They will grow exponentially. I mean, ChatGPT has gone from nowhere to everywhere overnight, and they will be massive problems. Yeah, you can generate code with ChatGPT, and it's rubbish, and it's horribly insecure. It's please generate me this, not please generate me this and make it completely impenetrable. It's going to be a while before these new tools go from being really funky and new and really clever to being really funky and not quite so new and really secure. And biometric, it's going up and up and up. We all gaze at our iPhone to unlock it, but we need to remember the drawbacks. I can change my password, I can't change my fingerprint. So, what do we need to do? Loads of answers. Yeah, lots of vendors, including the one over there, will sell you a solution. Yeah, SOAR, SIEM, IDS, IPS, vulnerability scanning, endpoint detection and response. The names down here are just examples of those who provide some or all of the above. I've used, I think, pretty much all but one of those solutions. They're absolutely great. Yeah, so our IBM SOAR solution, great. I dip in a couple of times a day, few false positives, just works. Happily, it's run by my Spanish contingent, so I don't need the resource to manage it. But there's an elephant in the room. How many of us can honestly say that we get real value from the expensive tools we've bought? We all know people, even if it's not ourselves, who've gone out and lashed out £200,000–400,000 on a new SIEM solution, and they haven't actually got the manpower to regularly look at what it's spitting out. So you've got this thing ticking away in a corner. It might be telling you lots of really useful stuff. Are you actually exploiting it? What percent of the alerts do you have the time and resource to act upon? And actually, leaving that aside, have you got any of the basics right? Have you got anti-malware on everything? If you haven't, well, why have you gone out and focused on buying this other thing, even if you've not got the basics right yet? And also, kind of to Jose's point, do we really use the free stuff properly? In most of the things we have, you run up a new machine, you run up a new server, run up a new OS, it's got a lot of free stuff in it. Turn it on. But do we all turn it on? Do we look at the Windows security logs? Do we actually make the most of what we've got for free before rushing out and buying something? The answer to that is an absolute no. And when we have got the free stuff, do we even understand it? So, slightly techie, hands up if you know what a robots.txt file is. Okay, so for those who don't, a robots.txt, you put it on your web server, and when a Google bot comes along and crawls over your web server, it's basically telling it where to crawl. People see that as a security tool because it tells the robot where to crawl. Guess what? The malicious robots use it to look at and say, right, they're the bits that they want me to know about, I'm going to look at everything else. Robots.txt is useful for getting you up the search engine results. I know lots and lots of people who think it's a security tool. It's not. The other thing is, where do you start with cybersecurity? Hands up if you've got or know about ISO 27001. So 27001 starts with top management buy-in. Next thing you do, a risk assessment. That's fine. 27001 isn't actually a security standard. It's an IT risk standard. So you start with a risk assessment. But the thing is, why? For 27001, you do it because you have to. It says you have to. But say you're building a new office, and I've done a few of those in my time. It's how I met the missus. You're going to put fire escapes in. You're going to put a fire alarm in. Do you have to risk assess it before you do so? No, partly because the fire regulations would probably say you have to, but even common sense says we probably need more than one door in this thing. Yeah, even if it's not legal, it's kind of obvious. So, and hands up if you know who said that last line. If you wish to make an apple pie from scratch, you must first invent the universe. Any guesses who said that? Probably more for my generation in the room. Carl Sagan, famous scientist stroke science fictionist. And he's absolutely right. If you want to start from scratch and start with a risk assessment, you're going to start all the way back here and go through a bunch of stuff. And you're going to end up at a really obvious answer in the first instance, because there's some really obvious things that you need to do that are so completely blatantly obvious. What the hell do you need a risk assessment for? There's absolutely no point. Of course you're going to put anti-malware on everything. Of course you're going to change all your default passwords. Of course you're going to take your generic admin accounts out, control who can do what, have a firewall, keep stuff patched, to Jose's point earlier. And guess what, by the way, if I'd remembered to put it on, you'd see the Cyber Essentials logo on here, because those 5 things are actually what Cyber Essentials, the UK government standard, are that it tells you to do. They're all cheap and easy, and they come with the kit you've just bought. You don't need to go out and buy anything new for loads of money to do it. So use them. Awareness training, everyone's best friend. All our employees love security awareness training because it's so exciting and so easy to do, and everyone just flocks to it. It's brilliant. I have met precisely one person who made security awareness training interesting, and it's a wonderful woman called Lauriane Bourdin, and she and I did a conference in Pall Mall last April. She's actually now a director of ISC Squared, and she did a presentation on security awareness training. We all went, holy cow, that can be interesting. I'm not going to do it to death here because this is not a talk about security awareness training, but do it. You've got to do it. There's loads of inexpensive ways to do it. Try and make it regular, try and make it entertaining, make it brief, use different media, get a third party in if you must, because it's not that expensive to do. You've got to do it. I'm not going to dwell on it here, but it's another no-brainer. Why wouldn't you? Now in Santander we have a thing called an IFA, which confusingly for financial services is not an independent financial advisor, it's an internet-facing asset. And I kind of put them in 3 chunks. So the top one, anything sitting waiting for an inbound connection, web server, FTP server maybe an on-prem email server. Inbound email streams, where people are hoovering stuff in, or actually SMTP servers are sending it to you. And then the web filtering content analysis side of thing. So basically anything that can bring stuff from the internet into your internal network, whether it's by the outside pushing it or the inside pulling it. Use a 2-layer firewall. Never, ever, ever have firewall, internet on this side, LAN on that side. You have internet, firewall, DMZ, another firewall, internal LAN. Even if you can only afford one pair of firewalls, a lot of them can have multiple personalities, so you can do both in one. It's not optimal, but it's better than the alternative. Use a web filtering service. Historically, I've used ForcePoint. Other web filters are available. It's just I've happened to use it in 2 places because that's what they had already. Cloud-based ones are really good value, dead easy to set up, and they usually include filtering and malware protection, and they often have a bit of DDoS thrown in as well. And for inbound email, we use Mimecast. Other DLP solutions are available. Catch it before it gets to your mail server. My view, put it in the cloud. Let some other idiot deal with that before it even gets near your network. Use that solution, divert your inbound mail through it, because if it's getting filtered 95% before it gets to you, your life is a whole lot easier. To the same point, use a web application firewall. Again, I would always put it in the cloud, because again, it's someone else's network. One of the issues with having WAF on your own firewall is that the DDoS that's attacking you has made it all the way down your internet link. And the chances are, before your firewall even falls over, your internet link is saturated, so there's no point in having it anyway. So if you look at the telcos on Jersey, one of them has 3 high-speed connections off the island. Each of them has DDoS stroke WAF at the far end when it lands in France or the UK. Because if you can keep it off the link, it's someone else's problem. Back to our friend robots.txt. Use a bot blocker. There are bot blockers around which will effectively enforce what you want your robots.txt to do. There are loads. I'm not going to name the one I like because I'm on their advisory board and that wouldn't be fair. But there are loads around. Catch me over a coffee and I'll tell you which one. but use a bot blocker, because you can't rely on the bad guys being good, by definition. Assume breach. I'm going to say those words as well, because you absolutely need to deal with them. Because you will never, ever, ever fend off absolutely every attack that comes at you. It's just not possible. Even as a bank, we don't have infinite resource, quelle surprise, but we don't. So you need to know how you are going to mitigate what does get through, because it will be non-zero. Again, we've talked zero trust earlier. It's a great idea, and it's brilliant, and it works. For everything that's brilliant and works, there is always a downside. That's called life. We experience it every day. And the problem is that zero trust can be a pain to manage, and it can get in the way of users. Whether the trade-off is worth it, it may well be. Security versus usability versus manageability. But at some point, whenever you weigh those three things up against each other, they are never going to end up right at the end of security at the expense of the other two. So yes, zero trust as a principle is a good thing. And yes, over time it will become easier to manage, because where you have these drawbacks, the vendors will realize this and will start to do something about their user interfaces and such like. But it's a pain to manage, but try and do it to the extent it's reasonable. And I kind of use the term limited trust. So I used to be a consultant for Grant Thornton. I ran their cyber practice in the Channel Islands. And a client had a ransomware attack. And they got about 50,000 files. I think it's 57,000 if memory serves. Now, they had something like 2.4 million files on their server. 50,000 got encrypted, which is a bad thing. But because the user that got attacked was sensibly provisioned with permissions, it only infected his group's shared folder. Now, the poor guy in IT had a bit of a long weekend doing a restoration of 50,000 files, but my goodness, it was a whole lot better than the alternative. Limited trust is a good thing to do. Yes, it can be a bit of a faff to do, but at that extent, checking your folder permissions from time to time isn't that big a price. And guess what? It doesn't cost you very much. Vulnerabilities. Again, things come in threes. I tend to look at them in sets of three. Stuff induced by lack of patching stroke upgrades, what I call the unforgivable stuff. Stuff that you've introduced by just configuring something wrong. Yeah, whether you've made a mistake, whether you've not quite taken out all the defaults, either applies. And those induced by bugs. It happens. You know, we have security bugs, we have functionality bugs. Sometimes it's just a bug that's let someone in. There is no excuse, as it says there, for getting attacked through a hole you could have patched. None at all. I've said there, if you've been hit by an actual zero day, where the bad guys got there before any of the good guys spotted it, do you know, that's part of life. One would hope you've got defense in depth, and maybe you can mitigate the attack by, if it got through your firewall and your WAF, it's got caught by the on-machine antivirus, say. But, you know, sometimes you look at it and go, could I really have done anything about that? No, there's probably nothing more I could have done within reason. You know, and I feel for people like that. I've seen one, again, in a consulting client, and we just kind of had to put it down to experience, because they really had done everything reasonable in that case, because everyone has limitations. Misconfiguration and bugs, though, you can test for, because you can test what the bad guys are trying to attack. I've called out ImmuniWeb there just because I've used it a few times. They have a free service where you can just point it at your website and it will give you a really, really 10,000-foot high-level view of how hideous or otherwise your security is. But there are some free tools out there. And similarly, there are some paid-for ones. You saw the Qualys logo. I've used that several times in the past. I found it very good. Other vulnerability scanners are available. Even if you can't do all your internal systems, at least you do your internet-facing ones. Because you've probably only got a couple of dozen of those, and it's not going to break the bank. Because guess what? That's where the biggest risk is. And if your scan shows up a vulnerability that's fixed by a known patch, I've said it's bad there. It's not necessarily bad. It's bad that it exists, but it's good that you've got your patching system here, your vulnerability scanning system there, and that one's gone, hey, that one's failed. Because effectively you've got a check and balance on your patching. So in that context, it's a good thing. For the poor sods who got hit by WannaCry, it's a much less good thing, because quite frankly, that was avoidable. And finally, with all of those, there's something you need to do, and that is visibility. A surgeon can't do an operation unless he knows where the problem is. Now, you don't just go diving into the patient and having a ferret about. What you need is visibility of what is right and what is wrong. As I've said there, particularly what's wrong. Yet what's right is actually quite a good thing to see as well. Because if you only ever see wrong stuff, well, maybe you're missing some. Yeah, if it's saying, right, this is right, and here's a few anomalies, that's probably a better thing. And all of the stuff that I've mentioned is not going to break the bank to do, because it comes with systems, or it's cheap, or it involves your existing staff doing stuff. There is a caveat to that last message. I was reading the other week the UK government's annual cybersecurity skills survey, and I think the number of cyber skills roles vacant, waiting to be filled, was of the order of 670,000. So you haven't necessarily got all the people you need. And I think 51% of businesses in the same survey had a basic cyber skills shortage. And that is of cyber people. This is not cyber skills across the employees. So assuming you can get the people and you've got people who can use these tools, exploit them to use what you've got and use them properly. And you can't use them properly unless you've got visibility to see what you need to do in terms of taking action and ensuring that they're working correctly. So, favourite example, a company I used to work with, it started as 32 core systems, a couple were decommissioned while we did this project. So about 30 core systems, and they needed to do an annual review of who's got access with what permissions. Fine, not a problem. How would we do it? Historically, manually. Really, really difficult. We could have used SailPoint or a similar IAM tool. Big effort to implement. So what we did is to say, right, let's get data extracts of all these applications. If it's Active Directory, we can pull the data out with PowerShell. Sometimes we can robot the GUI that you do the user configuration on. Pulled out the data into an existing SQL Server estate, so it didn't cost us anything for SQL, and put a Power BI layer on top. Within 3 months, the manual effort went down by easily 80%, more like 90%. And all of a sudden, it was easy to use because you just gave the people who needed to do the certification a Power BI that says, look at that, if it's wrong, raise a ticket to have it changed, if it's right, attest to it that it's correct. So what about all the other tools? Yeah, absolutely, consider them. They're great. There are brilliant, brilliant, brilliant tools out there. But only do them if you're going to get value. If you use expensive tools badly, no one wins. Because you'll get told off by the bean counters, and you'll get no value from them, and you'll get no funding for it next year. And like I've said, we have the skills gap. Don't buy a tool if you haven't got the people who can use it. A very dear friend of mine has had exactly that problem, to the tune of a £400,000 tool on a very, very small team. And by his own admission, he can't really use it properly. Remember also that basic security is dead easy, as has been said by previous speakers. Cyber Essentials I've mentioned already. If you get Cyber Essentials, which is basic, the reckoning is you're probably defending against roughly 80% of attacks. To get from 80% to 90% is an order of magnitude harder to get from 10 to 80. To get from 90 to 95 is another order of magnitude harder, and you will never ever get to 100%. But at some point, it stops being worth you trying. And that's the bit going back, I think it was Arno who said, that's the bit going back to where you need to interface to your risk people, because it's them who signs off on the acceptable risk. So to finish, sorting out the basics defend you against most stuff. Some fairly simple actions allow you to do all of the things you need to do in a basic form. And only once you've done that, then you do your risk assessment. Do the obvious stuff. Don't do a risk assessment and do the obvious stuff, because you just wasted a month. Just do the obvious stuff now, then do the risk assessment, then look at the gap. Now, I'm going to give you some homework. My stepdaughter is a primary school teacher. They don't do homework in her school. These are not directly related to this talk, but these are my 4 favourite things for you to read. So the guy at the top, Ken Munro, did a talk at the Channel Islands Information Security Forum conference that I hosted last October. His talk on hacking his internet kettle is absolute internet pricelessness itself. There's actually 3 or 4 versions of it on the web. That link is to the Jersey one, because it was my conference, but hey. There's a guy called Freaky Clown as well. He's actually Dr. Jessica Barker's other half. She's a famous cyber guru in the UK. He does a fantastic video. It's 43 minutes well spent, and that is all about physical security. And 2 other books which have nothing to do with cybersecurity. Matthew Syed, Black Box Thinking. I'm a massive believer in learning from mistakes rather than punishing for mistakes. That book is very, very, very insightful on that. And then finally, Matt Parker's Humble Pie is basically all about maths and how people get numbers wrong. And it's nothing to do with cyber at all, but it's a bloody good read. Feel free to stay in touch. By all means, take a pic of this slide. More than happy for any of you guys to follow up. Obviously, we'll be through there for a little while. after the panel session. I did, when these stools appeared, I thought we were going to have Boyzone on or something after the break.
Did we not tell you that?
Oh, well, yeah. I thought at least there's not a row of microphones, otherwise I'm doomed.
They couldn't turn up.
Oh, yeah. Tonight, Matthew, I'm going to be. So I'll be through on the networking for a little while after we've had the panel session, but by all means, give me a shout on any of the above. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Dave.